So, Mr. LaHood, to what do you attribute this not guilty verdict?
To a pursuit of truth, to being zealous advocates, to being humble when it was appropriate, to being aggressive when it was inappropriate, but always having a strategy moving forward, knowing there's a scripture that says that the truth will set you free, and I believe that's what happened with Adrian.
Was this a case of scapegoating? Was this a case of scapegoating?
We didn't say that originally. We wanted to present that case without calling it scapegoating. The jury got there. They got the feeling when we spoke with them after.
What did that mean?
Well, they saw gaps in the government's case. There was gaps in the case. They didn't see the logical consistency in some of the issues. They really liked that we brought out more evidence. They seemed like we brought out more evidence sometimes at times than the government did. And I asked them, I said, were we too aggressive at times? Were we not aggressive enough? And they said, no, your temperament on both of you was appropriate. And so they just saw the gaps in the case, and they really didn't understand what the government was trying to say about Adrian's behavior during a certain period of time.
And when there's scapegoating, does that mean that other officers escape justice, prosecution?
For me, scapegoating is someone takes the blame for something. Now, we don't have to attribute that something to individual people, but they're trying to, our position, one of our many themes was that Adrian was at the bottom of the totem pole. And so it was easier to blame him because he happened to be the first officer on the scene if you ignore all the behaviors he did in that moment. And he was always going to danger. And we presented that to the jury, and when they saw that, they came back with a verdict that we felt fit the facts.
You don't like to say you won this case?
There's no winners. I mean, there's precious babies that are left this earth, and there's families that are mourning. We understand that, we acknowledge it, so there's no celebration in the win. There's a celebration in vindication. Whenever truth is illuminated, then people should celebrate that, understanding that two things can be true at the same time. There can be people mourning tremendous tragedy and loss, and we're never going to make light of that, but then also celebrating the fact, or at least acknowledging the fact that somebody has been set free of obligation.
Jason, you addressed the issue of the chilling effect that a guilty verdict would have had.
Yes.
What did you mean?
Yeah, so what I was doing was responding first to the prosecutor's argument. And that's pretty typical that a prosecutor will say, send a message. But the problem is that in this particular case, you're not going to be able to convict Adrian and then officers will then respond perfectly, because they're always going to be in these scenarios and these situations where there'll be confusion, there'll be stress, there'll be all of these things going on, and if you don't understand the situation perfectly, then things like this can happen. But that verdict that they were asking for, the guilty verdict, would not make officers be perfect. What it would do is say, in Adrian's situation, he went to the danger, he went to the person, and it took him on the other side of the building from the shooter, which caused the confusion, which caused him not to be able to understand at the time. So the only people that weren't sitting in Adrian's position were the people who didn't go into the danger. And so what the message would be sending is don't go into the danger. Don't go confront somebody you think is the shooter, because if you do, and it happens to take you in a place that causes confusion, then all of a sudden, you're going to be in Adrian's chair and you're going to be prosecuted. And that's the point I was trying to make is you want people to do what Adrian did, which is do everything that he could in his power to try to stop this man from doing what he did.
Out of almost 400 law enforcement officers, only 2 are charged?
Yes, sir.
What does that tell us?
I don't know. I can't speak for her. I'm not going to get into her mind. What it tells me is that they want someone to take blame for this. And the person responsible for this horrific act is no longer on this earth, and I believe he's been judged eternally. So I think Adrian was an easy target, unfortunately.
Why?
Well, because he was the low man on the totem pole. He was the first on the scene, so you can distinguish him in that fact. There was a period of time that if you don't look at all the facts contextually, well, then you can look at Adrian and think that he did something wrong or didn't act enough. When you really look at the situation in the totality of the circumstances, you see that Adrian went to the danger initially, and then further went to the danger when he was one of the first 5 officers that went into that building.
Adrian, take me back to that day when you first got to the school. There was a call, shootings at Robb Elementary.
You know, just the call came out. Initially, it was a call. It was the accident that got my attention. And then, you know, and we talked about jurisdictions and stuff like that. So, you know, once they said they're running to the school, then it was the school district issue, you know, regardless whether wreck or not, you know, and, you know, shots fired, you know, I go, and the last broadcast that I hear is they're running towards the school. Didn't get a description, didn't get nothing. You know, when I pull up to that crash site and I drive in and I see that now, after the day after I did my interview, I could, I said it was a woman, I knew it was a teacher because I've already acknowledged that, through a process. But at the time when I see her running, I didn't know it was a man or a girl. So I go to her, I go to them, and confront them,
Melanie Flores?
Yes, Melanie Flores, And, she's hysterical. She's telling me. And, as soon as I get there, the rounds start going off. And like I said, I have 5 other buildings around me, so everything's just echoing everywhere, Yeah, it's just commotions. Everything's just going through your mind and processing. She's yelling at you. You're trying to get information, relay it, because like I said, I'm the first one on scene. I can hear everybody. I just don't know. I can hear the sirens. I can hear everything. I just can't see nobody.
And John, I think it's important though, but the timing matters. Because when he saw that round come out of the building, which he said in his interview, it was closer to when Sergeant Page was coming up, and that's when he knew for sure. So he's going to Sergeant Page, and then you saw in Coronado's video that as soon as they came up again, they heard another round of shooting, and then they realized they were in, and they both went in there on their own. And so the jury saw that, and they specifically mentioned Coronado's video that Sergeant Page and Adrian ran in on their own, and they were in that, we heard the term, the fatal funnel, which is a very dangerous situation to be in, and they did that. So the timing matters, and if you don't look at the context, and if you don't look at everything, then you can put Adrian in a scenario where he's acting, or not acting in a way that he should have maybe earlier on, and it wasn't. It was very later on in the situation.
Do you feel you're being made a scapegoat?
When the videos came out and started playing, yes, I realized that, they handpicked me. This was, they had an excuse for everybody else. They did this, they did that, but I had to do this. I had to do that. Everybody else, their train of thought was perfect. They did what they were supposed to do, what they did, but I didn't. That's when I felt like, yeah, I was pinpointed to be chosen to do this, I did the best that I could with the information I was getting, And if you've never been in a situation like that, you can sit here and tell me all you want about what I would have done or what you would have done. Until you're in that mix, you can't tell me anything different,
Adrian, did you ever see the shooter?
No, never saw him.
Never laid eyes on him?
Never laid eyes on him.
And the prosecution didn't dispute that.
Yeah.
Never in question, John.
It was never in question.
But yet there was other officers that laid eyes on him. There was another officer that asked permission to shoot him. There was another officer that was on the same side, one of 3, that had a long rifle that had the ability and the opportunity to maybe distract, deter, and prevent or impede the shooter from going in that building.
Why aren't they in court?
That's a question that we can't answer.
Why weren't they charged?
We don't know.
You never saw the shooter?
Never saw him.
And yet the families, obviously, understand. You know the families. How tough is it for you to go back to Uvalde and your family?
It's very hard. I left after 50 years living in Uvalde.
Born and raised there?
Born and raised there. Worked 18 years with the Head Start program as a teacher, The last class I was graduating at the high school, that was the last group of kids that I taught at the Head Start.
And now you're a pariah?
Did soccer for 18 years, ref soccer for 18 years, coach for 17 years. Worked for the Boys and Girls Club, This was, working with kids was a passion for me, So when I got the opportunity to come back to the school as an officer, I took it, And unfortunately, it's not the same.
Still painful?
Yes, pain. I understand what the family's going through, and it's hard to, if I tell them anything, I know it's not going to make them feel any better. But this is a struggle for me, for my family, to get up and leave. It's hard.
You're praying for him still.
And I'm still praying for them, Every day when I go to work, I pray for them. I pray for them and their families, and not just them, but the community,
You can never go home again?
Never go home.
And that's painful.
Yes.
And then, John, we can't ignore the fact that there are some families that their children are never going to go home either, right? And
Well,
so there's pain to go around, and that's why he said the community needs to heal.